Good morning. My name is Gad Lebanon and I'm Chief Economist North America here at the Conference Board. Welcome to our September edition of Human Capital Watch. And today we're going to talk about how job satisfaction is accelerating in a tight labor market. We'll share with you our results, the results of our latest job satisfaction survey, and they are quite interesting. But before we get there, just some of the main issues that we'll discuss. First, how job satisfaction and the tightening labor market are connected to each other. Then we'll go into details on the results of our job satisfaction survey that has been increasing for 8 years in a row, and it's quite high at the moment. And we'll finish with some specific actions HR leaders can take to engage workers and improve their satisfaction. As usual, there are all kinds of credits that you can earn, and HRCI, SHRM, CPE. You have to earn them, you have to stay online for the entire webcast, and they're only available for the live webcast only. If you want to watch it again or have your colleagues watch it, you can download the presentation from our webpage within 24 to 48 hours. Those are instructions here on the slide on how you can get the different credits. Together with me, two of the other authors of this report. First, from Chicago, Robin Erickson. She's a principal researcher at the Human Capital team. Good morning, Robin.
Hi, Gad. Thank you so much.
And to my right here in the studio, Calvin Wrong, a research analyst and the muscles and the brain behind this report. Welcome, Calvin.
Happy to be here.
So before we get to the actual survey, I wanted to, the improvement in the job satisfaction is very much related to labor market conditions in the US. And in case you haven't noticed, we have a historically tight labor market, especially in blue collar and manual services occupations, where it's almost unprecedented, the degree of labor market tightness. We are seeing a significant wage acceleration in the last year or two, especially again in blue collar and manual services, which is not surprising given that it's harder to recruit and harder to retain workers. And this is not just limited to a human research department problem. The labor market and the rising costs and turnover are impacting corporate profits. There's been a consistent decline in corporate profits, and in some industries more than others, like the manufacturing, for example, which hires a lot of blue-collar workers. Profits are now about 40% less than they were 5 years ago. So a significant impact on the company's bottom line. Now, companies are reacting to that. They are doing a lot of things like raising wages, as I mentioned, lowering education requirement, expanding pool of candidates to underrepresented demographic, using more teleworking, relocating, and also automating. We're seeing some improvement in labor productivity in the past 2 years. But one thing that is very much related to that is trying to improve job satisfaction in order to limit labor turnover. And that is a lot of what we're going to talk about. Just a few numbers about the labor market tightness. Here we have the unemployment rate in the blue line, and in the red line it's the broader measure of labor market slack that also includes people who are not actively looking for employment but wish they had one, or people who are working part-time but also wanted a full-time job. Both of those you see are historically low. The unemployment rate is actually the lowest in 50 years. So very tight labor market. That is reflected in recruiting difficulties. That's two measures from the National Federation of Independent Business Survey. The blue line is the percent of businesses with few or no qualified applicants for job openings. The red line are firms with positions that they are not able to fill right now. Both of them, they are at an all-time high. We also know from that survey that the quality of labor is the number one problem for those businesses right now. And it's not just difficult to recruit, it's also difficult to retain. Here we see in the blue line is the quits rate. That's the share of workers who voluntarily quit their job, and not for retirement, but it's typically for another job. And this is now above already pre-recession rates, and the trend is upward. You see the quits rate and the unemployment rate are almost a mirror image of each other. So before we get to show you the results, we wanted to ask you how satisfied you are with your job. So we have here a poll question. How satisfied are you with your job? It goes from very satisfied to satisfied, neutral, unsatisfied, and very unsatisfied. So I know it requires some self-reflection here for a moment, so I'll give you a few more seconds to think how satisfied are you. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, last chance, 1, and we're closing the survey. Okay, so the results are that the large majority of you are satisfied, yet not very satisfied with your job, but that is pretty good. Between those two categories, satisfied and very satisfied, 77% of you are satisfied with your job, which is fantastic. It's well above the overall population. Also, none of you are very unsatisfied, and that is probably because you're enjoying this webcast very much, and that impact your results. So any initial reactions, Robin? What?
I'm actually surprised, Gad, to see the high levels of satisfaction and those who are very satisfied. In fact, you could almost wonder if perhaps only people who are satisfied attend our attend our webcast.
Well,
but it's great news to know that our members are actually more satisfied with their jobs.
Yeah. So how does that compare to the overall population?
So if you'll go to the next slide, we can see that overall job satisfaction has increased over the last 8 years. And so this chart starts out in 1987 and goes through 2018. You can see that overall satisfaction is 53.7%. It's increased 2.7% from last year, and while that doesn't sound very high, look at some of the tiny increases that have been made in the past. So that 2.7% is actually the largest increase in the survey's 32-year history, and it continues the 8-year trend that you can see that started in 2010 as the U.S. started to recover from the recession. And we do believe, as Gad had said, that this rise in job satisfaction is tied to the tightening job market, especially because job security, wages, bonus, and retirements are all impacted by a tightening job market. As Gad had said, wages are increasing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So that's our first slide to share with you. And then we're going to follow that up by saying, look, there's been a steady increase in job satisfaction across all age groups over the last 5 years. So the blue line here is the group that's under 35, most closely tied to the millennials. The orange line is workers aged 35 to 54, those in their peak earning time. We mostly Generation X, some baby boomers, and then the gray line are definitely the baby boomers and the veterans. You can see that in 2015 there was a really large difference between the under 35, the millennials, and both the other groups, 35 to 54 and 55 plus, but that job satisfaction has actually converged in 2018. We were actually asked, so why do you think job satisfaction has gone down for under 35? I think we need to do a little bit more research for that, especially because their wages have gone up. So this year, their satisfaction with wages has gone up. So.
Right. And there is a question or a comment here from the audience. Higher level job titles could be more satisfied than wage workers. And that is probably correct, although we unfortunately in this survey we can't tell you what the occupation of the respondents is. But certainly when we look at household income, we see a higher job satisfaction for people who are coming from a higher household income than lower household income. So it is probably correct that people higher up in the organization are happier or more satisfied with their jobs.
Thanks, Gad. If we move on to the next slide, we wanted to show you something that we found. In the survey, we asked if the participants felt that jobs were plentiful or did they think that jobs were hard to get. And so this is the aggregate data from 2014 to 2018. But you can see that there is a pretty big gap between the gray line, those who feel jobs are plentiful, and the red, sorry, not the blue line, the blue boxes, and then those pink boxes, those who feel jobs are hard to get. There's a 22% or greater difference between all of those items there, all those components of satisfaction. We put boxes around 3 of them. You can see job security, and it's 29%. Those who feel jobs are plentiful are 29% more satisfied than those who feel that jobs are hard to get in terms of job security, which would make sense. The second box looks at overall satisfaction, and there is a 30% difference, or 29% difference rather, between those who feel jobs are plentiful and those who feel jobs are hard to get. And then over on the right, you can see it's another 29% or the 30% difference right there on the wages bar. So on the wages box. So you can see that those economic job components around job security and wages, they are very much impacted by those who feel that jobs are easy to get versus those who feel that it's hard to get. And we also found that typically we believe that the people who think jobs are plentiful are living in the areas of the country where there is lower or higher
unemployment.
Higher unemployment. Yeah. Lower unemployment. I'm getting my adjectives mixed up because that would mean that jobs are easier to get. And so in our survey, we have put together this aggregate of job satisfaction by the different states and territories. The dark blue is the highest satisfaction at almost 60% level. The lightest colors, very light gray or white, is the lowest satisfaction. Massachusetts actually has the lowest satisfaction at 41%. And Colorado, closely followed by Minnesota, have the highest job satisfaction. You can see Colorado is at 60%, Minnesota is at 59.8%. And we think that this has to do with population growth. Over the last few years, there's been more of a trend to moving to the Southwest, and so we think that greater satisfaction happens in states with greater population growth. Gad or Calvin, is there anything else that you would add to this?
Yeah, no, I think in areas that have rapid population growth, there is more a dynamic economy, more jobs are being opened up, and more opportunities for growth. So I'm not surprised that we are seeing that. Also, there is relatively fast population growth in the South Atlantic. So, and there we're also seeing somewhat higher higher population growth and higher job satisfaction.
Perfect. Actually, Gad, I'm going to turn it over to you now for our next polling question.
Right. If we go to our next polling question, we want to ask you further details. So, what components of your job are you most satisfied with? So we have 5 options here: job security, people at work, interest in work, commute to work, physical environment. So those are just 5 out of the 23 components that we have in this survey, but we chose 5 to ask you about. Again, what components of your jobs are you most satisfied with? We'll give you a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we close the survey. So, the number 1 is interest in work. That's what you almost most of you are most satisfied with. You're also pretty satisfied with people at work. That's the number 2 option. And number 3, there is a tie between job security and commute to work. And very few of you chose a physical environment, which I guess is not something you're very excited about, or is not that important to you. So, Robin or Calvin, any reactions to that?
Yeah, well, the audience picking interest in work definitely does resonate with a lot of our own research, where we see that interest in work is in the top 5 components that US workers are most satisfied with, along with commute to work, people at work, physical environment, and job security. What I think is really interesting about this, and before I get into that, and basically all 5 of these are hovering at 60%, and it's kind of like this 5-way tie. What I think is really interesting about all 5 of these components is that all 5 of these components are within a worker's control. You know, a worker can choose a job that's within an acceptable commuting distance, and a worker can really choose who they interact with on the job. They can also choose an interesting job for them. If you contrast that against the 5 least satisfied components, bonus plan, promotion policy, performance review processes, these are all aspects of a job that are kind of thrusted upon a worker. So it does seem that part of what makes a job component satisfied is personal agency.
Right. I would say also there is a big difference between the results from our survey here and the results from the survey, the job satisfaction survey. And I think the main reason is that we forced you to choose just one option. And here in the survey, the job satisfaction survey, you were asked to react, or the respondents were asked to rate each of them. So for example, interest in work is slightly, in the survey, slightly below commute to work, but in the poll that we did among our audience now, it was much higher. And then I guess that's because while people are happy with their commute to work, it's not a particularly important part of their job, and interest is a more dominant one. So that's just to kind of explain to you some of the reasons why we see those differences.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So now I was just going to say, we're going to look at some more of these specific components, and Gad would love to get your input on this as well, but we wanted to show you that as job satisfaction has increased, so has job security and wages. If you look at the years from 2011 to 2018, and so the orange line is the job security line, the yellow line is the overall satisfaction right there at 53.7% in 2018, and then the satisfaction with wages has grown. It's roughly the same trend line. Gad, how would you explain that?
Yeah, so it's not surprising that in a period of tightening labor market, the the components of job satisfaction that are the fastest growing are the ones that are related to labor market, and probably nothing is more related to labor market conditions than job security and wages, which is what we're seeing here. In terms of job security, layoff rates are at historically low, and companies are barely laying off any workers. It's also in such a tight labor market. Laying off someone is you'd think more than once about it, because replacing that one person quickly with a high quality worker is much more difficult right now. So workers are...
It also costs more. Sorry, guys,
Sure.
I just was going to add to that. It also costs more to replace a worker, because not only do you have the hard costs of replacing someone, but you have the lost productivity costs. And typically organizations don't track that. But if you have a job that's open for 3 months or 4 months, then you're definitely going to be able to, there's significant lost productivity.
Yeah. No, so that's one thing. And the wages, we're also seeing an acceleration in wages, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of it is in blue collar and manual services. So they are finally seeing a rapid wage growth. And what's interesting, we don't have this slide here, but in the report we also show the satisfaction from wages by age. And the age group that is seeing the fastest growth in satisfaction from wages are people under the age of 35, which is not surprising because their actual wages are growing rapidly during an economic crisis or a recession. Wages of young people are the first to drop, and they are dropped much more aggressively, but in period of tight labor market, their wages are moving up faster because many young people are new hires, and the wages of new hires are reacting to labor market conditions much more than wages of existing workers. So that's why we're seeing more satisfaction from wages from young people. And that actually creates a problem in many organizations, because wages of new hires is moving up quickly, but those of existing workers are moving much more slowly. Then that creates pay compression, which is now at historically high levels. More experienced workers are seeing younger and less experienced workers make as much as they do, and sometimes even more. And it's hard to think of something more demoralizing than seeing a younger, less experienced colleague making more than you do, which is a major issue. We have a couple of... Yeah, Robin, you wanted to...
I was just going to say the exact same thing as you, that we have a couple questions that came in. Someone commented that employees are also able to see an attainable path to advancement. And we're actually going to talk about that potential for future growth very soon. Another person asked us if we had any average time to fill data. Unfortunately, we don't, but feel free to shoot us a message after this if you have additional questions.
Well, we don't have in this slide deck, but there are measures or proxies of time to fill positions, and they are historically high, even higher than they were in 2000, which was the tightest labor market in the last 50 years. We are seeing now that it takes longer in many industries and overall to fill positions than it used to be. Just to remind you that if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write them in the question box on your screen. I
think I'm going to talk now about the differences in gender, where we find that men and women are currently more satisfied with different job satisfaction components. So just for the ease of making sure that you could see the data, we have split the slide. So this slide shows the areas. We looked at 23 components. of job satisfaction, and you can see that there are 11 here where women are more satisfied, specifically commute to work, and you can see the others. We thought it was really interesting to look at, why, which areas are women more satisfied with than men. In some places, there are very small differences. Obviously, family leave plan and flexible time, interest in work, there's very small differences because this chart just looks at the difference. So, but women are slightly more satisfied with a number of things, those 11. We also noticed, in terms of overall satisfaction, that men are slightly more satisfied overall, but only slightly. So men are 1.7% more satisfied overall with their job satisfaction. But you can see here the items that women are more satisfied with. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see the 12 areas that men are more satisfied with. And again, people at work, the difference is almost negligible. However, when you get to the bottom, you can see pension, retirement plan, wages, and bonus plan. Men are significantly more satisfied with those than women. And it's very interesting just to see, when you start to think about perhaps why are there some of these differences, as Calvin mentioned earlier, perhaps women are more satisfied with the things that they're choosing in terms of that makes their work life and their family life more accessible. We do know that men are more likely to switch jobs than women, and that when you switch jobs, as Gad was just mentioning, you can increase your salary. Compared to if you stay in a job for a long time, there is something called wage compression, which, as Gad said, it's very demoralizing when new employees are brought in at higher pay levels with less experience.
Yeah.
So, anything else on that?
I just want to clarify because I see a question here that suggests that there may be a confusion here. So you see in those two slides, women and men. So when the numbers are to the right of the zero, that means that women's average satisfaction is higher than men's average satisfaction. In the next slide, when the numbers are to the left of the zero, that means that men are more satisfied with those components. So men are more satisfied with wages and bonus plan, and not less satisfied. And I want to make sure that we're going to talk about two separate concepts, so I want to make sure that the audience understands. So when we think about satisfaction and the components of it, we can think about them in two ways. One is how much are you satisfied with a certain component, and the second is how important is this component to your overall satisfaction. So for example, commute. You could be very happy with your commute, but it doesn't make that much difference in your overall job satisfaction. So that's one example. And there is a question here about people who are working from home. Is that included, captured in commute? So this is up to the respondents how they interpret this question. But I suspect that if you worked from home, well, let me ask you, Robin, because you work from home. So if you got the survey and you were asked how satisfied you are with your commute, what would you say?
I would say I was very satisfied with my commute.
So I guess that is probably how most people would interpret that. So I think we clarified the male versus female wage gap, and that there is a wage gap in favor of men, and it is in line with the results here that men are more satisfied with their wages. There is, I see a couple more comments or questions. Could part of the male-female difference in pay and benefits be due to higher average tenure for men? It could be. I am actually not. I don't know that men have an average higher tenure than women. Robin, do you know if that is the case. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, men have lower average tenure than women because men are more likely to switch jobs. I think in part that might be the higher satisfaction with wages could be in part because we still know that men are paid more in the U.S. than women for the same job, and that other countries are actually requiring a pay equity audit that's public to make sure that organizations are paying men and women the same for the same job with the same experience. I would actually guess that that's partially why men are more happy with wages. Also, the fact that if the more often you're willing to switch jobs, the higher you can drive your salary in a tight labor market, at least.
Yeah, I think part of the answer to this question we'll see in a few minutes when just to give you a quick preview. We find that wages and bonus are more important for men as a driver of job satisfaction. So it could be that, and for women it is work-life balance and workload and things like that. So it could be that men and women sort themselves differently into the jobs that fills their needs more. So that could be part of it, but I don't want to steal Calvin.
Well, we have a poll question, actually, Gad. Remember when you were explaining the two different types of satisfaction, the actual satisfaction level with the components, and then how important those things are? That's our next poll question.
Right. So we have a poll question, and here it's again the driver, not the level of satisfaction. What matters the most to your job satisfaction? And we have 5 options here. Potential for future growth, workload and work-life balance, performance reviews, recognition, acknowledgement, communication channels. So those are some of the items that we put here. Again, those are just 5 out of 23. So we'll give you, I know that also requires some self-reflection, so we'll give you a few more seconds to contemplate the answer. And we'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I wish.
Wait, were the results broadcast?
I can't see them now. Studio, can you put the results back on? It's coming. Just a second.
It's fascinating, Gad. I saw that there was 0 next to performance reviews.
Yeah. So, which is very different than our survey. So, we will talk about that in a few minutes. I think I saw workload and work-life balance. Now we can see that workload and work-life balance is ranked number 1. After that, potential for future growth. Recognition and employment and acknowledgement is number 3. Communication channels number 4, and nobody chose performance reviews. I wish we had the ability to do the separate polling for men and women, but that's beyond the scope of this technology. Something to look forward to. So, Robin, Calvin, any thoughts, reactions to the results here?
Yeah, these results do kind of go in line with our own research. It's not a perfect fit, but it somewhat complements our own research. We do see that workload and work-life balance are towards the higher end of the correlations. So to explain this a bit, essentially we looked at how correlated these components are to overall job satisfaction. And it kind of answers the question of what's really driving job satisfaction. If I ask you, how satisfied are...
Sorry, Calvin. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to tell the studio we can go to the next slide because we're still looking at the results.
No, we are in the... We're in slide... I can...
Yep, that's the right slide.
Yeah, yep. Okay.
Yep. So if I ask you, how satisfied are you with your job satisfaction? And you tell me moderately satisfied. I can then ask you, what about your job makes you moderately satisfied? And this is what this area really looks into. What is really driving your overall job satisfaction? Now, going back to the results, we do see that a lot of communication and development practices are what's driving overall job satisfaction. These are things like potential future growth, communication channels, recognition, acknowledgement, and interest in work. What I think is really interesting here is this really harkens back to a lot of the really quintessential IO psychology research. If you think back to the Hawthorne effect, it all talks about how workers are more motivated by these intangible rewards rather than things like compensation. And if you contrast against that to things that are lower on the correlation, things like commute to work, health plan, pension plan, sick leave, this isn't to say that these things aren't important to have, just that they aren't big factors in overall job satisfaction. As you can see, these correlations are much lower compared to potential future growth, which sits at 0.7. We also looked at gender differences.
Well, before if we stay here for one, there is a question about what does communication channels entail. I think probably the way most respondents interpret that are things like how senior management communicates with the organization, how managers communicate with their teams, those types of things. It's not like technical communication equipment or things like that.
But ultimately, like with many surveys, it's up to the participant to really decide what it means to them.
Right.
And if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to point out to everyone that wages is in the second half in terms of overall satisfaction. So it's not in the top half of components that are most important to satisfaction. It's in the bottom half, and that's actually in line with the research that says that it's not just wages that drive satisfaction with work and whether or not someone will take a job. All of those other things, like you were saying, Calvin, the Hawthorne effect, the intangible things matter at least as much, if not more, from just looking at this slide.
Right. And,
just thought I'd add that.
And I think, when we look at the ones, there may be a few surprises here, like communication channels or recognition, acknowledgement, or even performance review that are highly correlated, even though some people may not expect them to be among the most. And again, this is the way we measure this is not by directly asking people about, like we asked you, what are the drivers of satisfaction, but it's kind of like the implicit drivers based on the correlations of those components with overall job satisfaction. So even though maybe few would recognize that performance review process is an important driver of job satisfaction, it turns out that this component is highly correlated with overall job satisfaction. So there are some maybe hidden components that people are not aware of, but are very much impacting their overall job satisfaction. There are a few, there is a question here about transparency. I guess that's in relation to communication. Yeah. So,
the communication channels.
Yeah, so that may be also part of how people interpret communication channels. And there is a comment here, I work in corporate recognition, so very interesting to see it, number 3, higher than many other components. Yeah, people like a good word. Calvin, you did an excellent job in this survey.
Thanks so much.
Hey, what about
Robin,
me,
you
Dad?
too. Calvin, you're about to talk about the differences in drivers between men and women.
Yeah, so we also looked at the differences between drivers in men and women, and it's very similar to the graph we saw before, where if it's on the left side, men factored in more, if it's on the right side, women factored in more. And as Gad and Robin talked about, it does seem that women factor in these social or environmental factors more, things like people at work, workload, communication channels, and work-life balance. While men factor in compensation more, things like wages, promotion policy, and bonus plans. And to explain how we did this, we subtracted the correlation coefficients from each other. And once again, this does kind of harken back to kind of the wage gap stuff, where it could be that men are simply choosing jobs that are higher paying or searching for jobs that are higher paying, while women are self-selecting into jobs that are more flexible for themselves. Now, let's look at what this means for HR.
Wait, but if we stay on this for 1 second, sorry. Those results are in some way strengthening the stigma that men care more about wages and bonus and promotions, and women care more about workload and work-life balance and people. But that suggests that this stigma is there is some truth behind that, and it's something that probably companies should talk about directly rather than not mention. It is something that the data bears out very clearly.
And to your point, Gad.
So, Gad, can I just add? Sorry, Calvin. I just want to add to that. I actually think that the difference is reflect the expectations and the reality. So I think that in many cases, women have more family responsibilities, either with children or aging parents, and men have typically carried more responsibility for being wage earners. And I know that's not the same. It's not the same as it was 40, 50 years ago. But I just think that these numbers may not reflect sort of the stigma as much as the reality. And that perhaps the conversations and the study about this needs to happen at a higher level to sort of figure out, rather than just saying this is the way it is, perhaps we need to be switching around some of those responsibilities.
Right, and there is a comment here that this doesn't apply to all men, and that is definitely true.
Or all women,
Yeah.
or all women.
Of course, it's important to really emphasize here that these are relative differences, where if you look at it, it's a 0.7 difference. So while the difference is there, these differences are fairly minor between the gender groups. And it's not saying that women don't care about wages and that men don't care about people at work. It's just that comparatively, you do see these differences.
Right.
And going back to our earlier chart, across both men and women, the top things that do drive them are still the same: recognition, communication channels. So in the end, the takeaway here isn't necessarily that men care about wages and women care about people at work, rather that we all care about the same things. But if we had to look at differences, this is what you see.
Right. And there's a question.
There's actually, I was just saying, there's an interesting comment, Gad, around that our audience would have been interested to see if this broke down the same way for the different generations. And we haven't actually done that analysis yet. So, Calvin, that might be something really interesting, and maybe we could do a blog about it.
Yeah. Sounds good. I can definitely look into it.
Yeah. So, Robin, we now came to the part about implications for the HR function. Do you want to mention a few points here?
Sure, be happy to. And in fact, I'm going to ask for some input from you guys as well. After I explain this chart, it's a little bit hard to understand, but we think that you will find it as interesting as we do. We hope that you will. So this is a 2x2 chart looking at satisfaction on the y-axis and the correlation or the driver, how important are those items to overall job satisfaction on the x-axis. And so you can see that on the bottom left-hand side, we have the low driver, low satisfaction items, and those are more related to benefits, things like family leave plan, flex time plan, bonus plan. That's then the pension retirement plan, definitely. It's not that those things aren't important to people, it's that they're obviously set when someone takes a job, I believe. So they know what those will be when they take a job. In addition, the things that in the top left, low driver, high satisfaction, you can see commute to work is the highest satisfaction at 60%, but it's one of the lowest in terms of the importance of that item. And obviously someone, as Calvin mentioned, someone has chosen that commute to work when they take a job, and oftentimes when organizations move locations, they suffer attrition after that because people have different views on how much of a commute they're willing to do. If you look over at the box on the far right, top right, high driver, high satisfaction, there's many, oh, sorry about that. There's many items that sort of clump together. You can see that people are moderately, so they're satisfied with them, but they're only moderately important to job satisfaction because they're not as far to the right as, per se, the ones in the bottom right box, which is the high driver, low satisfaction category. So we've actually put 6 items there in a box because we think it's really important that organizations think about what to do to move those 6 items up forward, move them up so that they're not just important in terms of the driver, but the employees are actually very satisfied with them as well. So Gad or Calvin, do you want to jump in here and add anything else to understand this scatter plot?
Sure, but first thing, I do want to answer some of the questions here. One of them is about, was this done internationally in the US? Another one was about, essentially this...
the answer is US.
Yes, it's US based only, and this survey was tied to the CCI, the Consumer Confidence Index. So this is a nationally representative survey. We had about 2,000 respondents in the survey. And to get into the scatter plot, to your point, Robin, that green box on the lower right-hand corner, that definitely is how you can really capitalize on this research. Like if you want to improve your company's overall job satisfaction, it's really looking at these components. Work-life balance, potential future growth, communication channels. These are all really bang for the buck ways to increase overall job satisfaction, as they are highly correlated with overall job satisfaction.
Right. And there's also a question here about how exactly we define satisfaction. And it's simply, we asked a question of how satisfied you are with your job, and there are 5 options from very satisfied to least satisfied, and the 2 top options, very satisfied and satisfied, we looked at what the percentage who chose those 2 options. So that's the statistical definition of how we got to those numbers. There's also a question here about what, when we mentioned at the beginning that one of the ways companies are reacting to the tight labor market is by automation or digitalization, and they ask us to explain this. So if you have a shortage of workers and it's hard for you to fill positions, one way to deal with it is to increase automation, and then you need fewer workers. So like, for example, in response to increase in minimum wages, some fast food restaurants said that they will, and they are doing it to some degree, implement automated kiosks that will require fewer workers. So that's an example of if you have higher wages or it's hard to find workers, one way is simply to replace workers with technology. There is how about the definition? What does high levels of satisfaction give to the organization? I think that's something that Robin was about to talk about, or not. If not, then I'm sure she will be glad to talk about. So, Robin, you want to take this?
Sure, Gad. So job satisfaction is definitely correlated with organizational profitability. We also looked at the fact that job satisfaction is not the same as engagement. Engagement levels are typically lower than job satisfaction. So think, for example, that someone could be satisfied with their job, but it's just a way to pay the bills. It's just a way to make sure that their kids have a better life than they do, versus someone who's very engaged with their work, who's motivated by their work, they're enthusiastic about it, they feel like they're making progress toward their goals, and that they are willing to give discretionary effort to the organization. And so, Gallup has been reporting on the engagement levels for many years, and there is a difference. Engagement is about 34%, and as we saw, satisfaction is much higher than that at 53.7%. So, but there's definitely, a reason why organizations want employees to be satisfied in a tight labor market, because if your employees aren't satisfied, number one, it's going to affect your employment brand in terms of attracting new employees, and it will also affect your attrition levels, because if employees don't feel like you are meeting their expectations around the promises that you made when they took the job, then they will leave and they'll look for something else. And right now it's pretty easy for most employees to find another job somewhere else.
And to your point, Robin.
I did.
Yeah, and to your point, Robin, we do see a very strong relationship between engagement and job satisfaction. It's almost as if job satisfaction is a precursor to engagement. What I think is really interesting about these two concepts in particular, if you think about the constructs between the two, satisfaction as a concept, it's like being full. It's reaching a point that you're okay, while engagement is really excelling. So one definitely comes before another. And as we know, engagement is highly correlated to productivity, retention, and a whole slew of great profitability, whole slew of great business outcomes.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to go to the next slide, which is basically just to talk about how organizations can improve these strongest drivers of overall job satisfaction. These are the 5 items that were in that box. Well, there were 6 because we combined 2. But the first one is around implementing or enhancing a total talent mobility program to demonstrate growth potential to employees. So that idea of growth potential is really important, especially in a tight labor market, because basically people don't want to wait for their boss to die and sit in a job. So really strong leaders are trying to think about ways for their employees to grow and develop, and perhaps looking at other options within the organization. We actually just published a report this spring on total talent mobility. We call it total talent mobility because it combines both global mobility and internal mobility, and we think that those two concepts need to be included together so that organizations have one very strong total talent mobility program. The second thing that we think that organizations need to do is exactly what we had discussed earlier around looking at the transparency of communication channels and then determining whether to make improvements. And many people say that they get too many communications, but they're not getting the right ones, or that the right messages aren't getting to them in the right time, or that leadership isn't as transparent as they should be in terms of the reasons for things. So definitely be looking at the transparency. It's a good idea perhaps to do a communications audit. Look at the communications, see what's resonating most with employees, what's most valued, and then think about trying to synthesize some of those messages, or to figure out the best communication channels to get the most important messages across. The third is to create or enhance an employee recognition program. And many organizations have an employee recognition program. However, they're not always as well used as they could be. And so what do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes, if a leader isn't as attuned to the needs for employees for recognition, they may not actually use that recognition program. Some leaders might use it more than another. We also found best practice examples of companies who started recognition programs that are driven by the employees. So an employee is given a certain amount of dollars or points every month, and then they can recognize their colleagues who have done a really fabulous job and recognize them. So it could be formal recognition, it could be informal recognition, but there's definitely work to be done, I think, for most organizations in terms of either creating a program or enhancing it. The fourth initiative that we think that organizations should be thinking about was actually the one that came up here as 0, that nobody was most driven by their performance review process. Doesn't surprise me at all. Performance management is in flux in many different organizations. There's been a trend to start eliminating ratings, and then some organizations have eliminated ratings in lieu of continuous listening. So they have continuous listening programs and they're providing more feedback, but then they haven't been able to differentiate performance well enough. So some of them have stopped just doing the continuous listening, and they've reinstated ratings. So there's a lot going on, but just only, in our survey, only 36.5% of the respondents were satisfied with their current performance review process, but yet it's one of the most important drivers of satisfaction. Our suggestion is that organizations should ask their employees what inspires them from their performance review. Gallup just published something that said that only 14% of employees are actually inspired by their performance reviews. So ask your employees what they're inspired by, and if they aren't inspired by them, ask them what would inspire them. And then last but definitely not least, this is the combination of the workload and work-life balance. We think it's really important for organizations to monitor and then, when necessary, decrease employee workload in order to increase work-life balance. I mean, right now, technology allows employees to work while they're on vacation. In fact, most people expect employees who are on vacation to respond to urgent emails unless they go out of the country or they write in their out-of-office message that they don't have any access. But we can work 24/7. We can work from home, as I do, since I'm not in New York, where the conference board is located. But it would make it really easy to work all the time. So the other challenge that I think a lot of organizations have is that after the recession, the do more with less mindset has persisted. We see that in the fact that many organizations haven't filled open positions because they are either waiting because they're worried that the economy might change, we might have a recession, or they think that they can get away without it. But what happens when jobs aren't filled is that the employees who are there, their workload becomes often untenable, and it can drive attrition if employees are being forced to do the work of two people, and then they just realize, I can't do this much, I'm going to go start over somewhere else. And how often have you actually seen that a person leaves and they're actually replaced with two people? So it just goes to show that it's very important for organizations to think about their employees' workload and then make efforts to foster more work-life balance. And the big focus on well-being that we have right now is a direct effect of all the pressure on employees to work so much. So those are our suggestions.
We are almost running out of time, so I just wanted to quickly remind you of the main findings, and that we had a strong increase in job satisfaction, but we also expect it to continue in the survey that we're about to do for 2019. And in 2020, as the labor market continues to tighten, we're expecting those job satisfactions to go higher, and that means that employees would get used to higher levels of satisfaction and would go away if they don't get them. So we gave a few suggestions for the things that are ranked low in terms of satisfaction level, but high in terms of the driver. So that's something we suggest you focus on. Before we conclude, I just want to mention a few events. Like, one of the benefits of joining this webcast is not just the great material that you've heard in the past hour, but also people who attended this webcast can join our event on talent shortages and challenges and solutions on October 16th in New York. So this is, if you join this webcast, you can, it's a complimentary event for you. At the bottom there is an email and a phone number. If you want to join this event, you can, it's also on our website. You can call and reserve a space. Space is limited. Also, for people who attended this webcast, you can use the code KN1 for a $500 discount on the upcoming conference or the 2019 Employee Engagement and Experience Summit on November 14th and 15th in McLean, Virginia. Our next Human Capital Watch is the impact of AI in the workplace. One of the main projects of the human capital team this year, and it will be moderated and presented by Mary Young. And finally, if you have time to give us some feedback and suggestion, we would greatly appreciate it. There will be a feedback form in a minute. I want to thank Robin and Calvin very much for being here and sharing, I think, wonderful insights on this topic. And to all our audience, I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.